So I realise that I have entitled this video Opaque Transparency and Caustics, and we might think, okay, caustics, yeah, great, love to learn how to do that, but we might also think opaque transparency sounds a little bonkers, because if something is opaque, it certainly isn't transparent. Now, I'm not going to make some sort of defence that that's supposed to make sense in some kind of way. The only way it does make sense is with regard to the options that are available within the UI here. You're going to see that that naming of things is actually kind of totally unintuitive, but I have to admit I found it a little bit difficult to imagine what terms I would use instead that would actually make any more immediate sense. So let's just forget the bonkers sounding nature of something that is transparent and opaque, and let's just worry instead about the actual effects and options that we have available to us here. Here is the thing that we're on about, this little opaque checkbox down at the bottom here. You'll notice this is a surface level attribute. It's not part of any particular shader. It can be applied to any shader. The thing it is there for is transparent object, so stuff that's using, for instance, dielectric or transparent in principled, delta or sigma, so on and so forth. Basically, any time we're doing glass, or I should say many times when we're doing glass. In terms of things that are translucent or subsurface scattering, no, totally unimportant. But for clear objects, glass, clear plastics, liquids, then it becomes important. You might think that there's no way you'd be wanting to turn on opaque for a glassy, transparent object, but that's not true. So let us see what we've got here, right? We've got this little statuette who is, sort of, well, basically glass. We're using a dielectric material on her here, and we've just got a very simple grey plane underneath, no speck or anything, and just a single distant light in our scene, which is illuminating her here. No GI or anything else going on. And okay, she looks nice and, glass-like. Refractions and, specular hits and so on and so forth, all very pretty. And we can see, of course, that the light is passing through. She's got this red transmittance colour, and of course we see that that is being carried through and projected onto the ground beneath her. Exactly what we would expect to see in the real world. Now let's turn on opaque, and we see that she gets a fully shaded shadow. It is, of course, as if she were an opaque object, and you think, okay, that can't possibly be correct. However, here is the thing with objects like this. What we are used to seeing, of course, with glassy objects is they cast caustics through, right? We get these, bright spots from the light that is being focused by their refraction. As such, what we actually see in the real world, and this is a photograph, by the way, not a render, this is a little glass statue of a wolf, is that, look, it does indeed cast a shadow, even though it's clear glass. It's a bit frosted on the body, but the legs are clear, head's clear. It's casting a dark shadow, except here we see this bright area between the legs where the light is being focused by the glass body, and we are getting this caustic effect falling onto the ground beneath him. We can see again something similar under the paw over here. You see you've got the paw there, and you've got this donut of shadow surrounding this bright little spot. How is it that a transparent thing casts a shadow? Try it out for yourself. Get a glass of water, shine a flashlight through it. It casts a dark shadow with a caustic spot. How is this possible that we get a dark shadow from a clear object? Well, it's because of the fact that the light is being focused. So the light that is entering this paw, or this paw, part of the statue, is being bent and focused down to come right out the middle, forming this very bright spot, meaning that these areas surrounding it have no light coming out, have no light falling on it, I should say. Because there's no light coming out this part of the glass, it's been focused to this central region, and so we get this donut shadow with the caustic in the middle. And you say, okay, that's great, but where's my caustic? Well, by default, we're not getting them here. And this is what the opaque switch does for us. With the opaque switch off and no kind of actual proper caustic effect rendering, then we get this very sort of quick cheat caustic, if you will. It's just a simple color cast that you get through transparent objects. It's really not very realistic at all. You wouldn't see this in the real world. But it's a quick effect to render, it's cheap, and it's sort of, it matches visually with what you might expect to see. It's the sort of thing that if you see it, you might not notice it so much. However, if we want proper glass, then we need to turn opaque on. That makes the glass object cast a true shadow. What we then need it to do is to cast caustics, and for that we need GI. Now, in other videos we've talked about rules for interior and exterior lighting and not using background GI environment lights, portals, blah 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 blah. We've also talked about the reflection and refraction models that we use and stuff like that. All of that still applies. This doesn't change any of that. As I say, this is a simple scene with just the one light, but I have caustics checked here in my GI, and so I just turn my GI on, and now what we get is this caustic effect coming through. You notice if I uncheck opaque, GI still renders that caustic effect, but it does it without the shadowing. To get a realistic effect, I need that shadow and I need the caustic. Now, what you can probably see is that the caustic isn't really these tight, focused spots, right? I'm just getting this sort of pinky red cast, so it's sort of a pinky red shadow that the GI is picking up. Why is that? Well, if you'll recall back to the video on the refraction and reflection shading model, yes, where we looked at ray trace only, and we looked at things like the environment lights and the portal lights or the area lights. We're using visible to camera. In this case it's a distant light, but it does have some angle. I need visible to camera on for the light. I do that, and now, here we go. Now we're getting proper caustics. Notice again, if I turn the opaque option off, then we're still getting the caustic rendering here. We're getting these focused areas of light coming through from the light, but again without the shadow, so it's unrealistic. As this begins to refine there, we can see that it is coming up pretty darned noisy. Of course, in part, this is because I've only got a few rays. Caustics are quite expensive to render in time-wise and sample-wise when it comes to our GI. We can see that it is purely an effect of the GI, so as we see here, turning up our refraction samples doesn't actually change the caustics themselves in any way. Really, our only hope is to increase the number of rays that we use to generate them. As you can see here, we're on 8 GI samples, which admittedly isn't very high, but it is exceedingly noisy. So you can see this can be quite a render hog to actually get really smooth, clean caustics. There's a couple of things that we can do. Because the caustics are part of GI, they therefore become part of the diffuse indirect, and they're diffuse indirect because remember this is a diffuse lighting effect that's falling onto another surface, in this case the ground here. So that can be a candidate for using the good old noise filtering here and applying that, if to nothing else, to the diffuse indirect channel and maybe rendering out buffers. The other thing that we can do is to notice that the caustics will actually work with interpolated GI. So you don't have to be using brute force. The problem that you get when using interpolated GI for caustics is that they're very soft. They really don't pick up details well, but they are very smooth and fast to render. So if you do have a situation where you're wanting caustic effects, another option might be again to render out different parts of your image to different buffers and then combine them in post. So you would use interpolated for just the pass that you render that contains the caustics. And for other stuff, if you were using GI elsewhere and maybe you were using brute force, then you could do a separate render for that. Of course, it depends upon the particulars of your scene. You might be able to get away with not using, caustics at all, turn the opaque off, and just be satisfied with this sort of cheap, fake caustic-ish effect, or this, pass-through effect. But you can see the problem it does have is that even though our statuette here is laying on the ground in contact with the ground, it sort of doesn't look like it because there's none of that contact shading. You see, if I just throw this over to principled there, now we get, contact shadows with the ground. It looks a lot more real. It looks like a solid object that is indeed laying on this ground plane. But of course, using the dielectric without the opaque and the caustics, it looks an awful lot faker. It looks like it's floating. And this does give us a clue as to when to use opaque as well, because it's not the case that you're going to need to use opaque and caustics rendering any time you have glass in your scene. There are certain objects for which it really doesn't matter, and generally these are windows. So if it's windows in a room in an arc-vis shot, or maybe you're doing a shot in a bathroom and you've got, glass-walled shower or something like that, or a bath screen in frosted glass. Perhaps it's a car, and of course you've got the windows of the car which are all glass and using dielectric or some such. These aren't objects lying on a surface. And of course, we're not really used to imagining these caustic effects coming through, window glass. They do happen and they do exist, but they're much lesser seen. As such, in those cases, you really don't need to worry about this opaque setting or caustics at all. The only time when it's really going to make a difference is cases exactly like this one, where we have an object, a solid object, that is made out of glass and it is resting on a surface. So like an ornament on a tabletop, or a glass of whiskey on a sideboard, or what have you. There are also a couple of little tricks that you can employ just to claw back a little bit of additional render speed when you are wanting caustics in cases like this. So see that I've got the bust object itself selected here, and in the object properties I've turned off self shadow and receive shadow, because of course it's a glass transparent object. Often you don't really see shadows falling on these things. Certainly self-shadowing is not necessary. And if we look in the lighting tab, you'll notice I've also checked exclude caustics. Notice, of course, that is for caustics falling on it, not its ability to cast them. Okay, so that means that we don't have to put up with any details where the object is going to be, a caustic coming out of a ridge, or her shoulder is going to be then trying to fall onto another area of the glass and getting re-refracted, or seeing its own caustics refracted through itself and stuff like that, which would of course add up more render time in our recursions and things of that nature. So there we have it. That is the story with this little opaque switch, where you need to use it, and of course what it pertains to, which is somewhat oddly enough transparent objects, their shadows and their caustic casting.